has nothing to do with the description anyway, other than there's indie people here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Sure, shut the door.
Louder? Okay. So my name's Sebastian Haley, and I'm the culture editor for GamesBeat. And to my right, I have Tommy Refenes. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Close enough. From Team Meat, Super Meat Boy. And immediately to his right is Tyrone Rodriguez from Nicalis. They've ported Cave Story and a few other titles to the Wii, among other things. And to his right is Jonathan Blow from...
Who's turning off the iPad? Turn off the iPad.
Yeah.
It's not even my iPad.
Jonathan Blow is playing... What are you playing?
Mass Effect.
That's awesome. How indie is that? So Jonathan Blow, the creator of Braid, is playing EA's Mass Effect on his iPad. And last but not least is Chris Hecker from Definition 6, who is working on Spy Party.
We're actually playing independent game right now, so...
Not actually.
It was Mass Effect 7. I made a better joke.
They're investigating microtransactions for the next game.
We don't know whose iPad it was, but we just bought $400 worth of hats.
So here at GamesBeat 2012, our theme is crossover. And while major developers, and more specifically publishers, tend to follow trends, indies are known for bucking trends and cutting their own path. So this panel is supposed to be a discussion about, what the move towards cloud gaming and next generation hardware means for indie devs, if anything. Whether that's what we actually end up talking about or not, I make no promises. So let's kick it off because we don't have a lot of time. The first question is for Jonathan. What does indie mean to you?
I refuse to answer that question. That's the one question that
I told Sebastian ahead of time if he asked John what does indie mean, and he's going to walk out. So.
Well, I did not actually walk out reflexively, but yeah.
No, the actual first question is before we get into the future and next gen and cloud gaming and everything, I'd like to talk a little bit about the present state of indie gaming. So what I'd like to ask is how you guys, between all of you, you released your games on many different platforms, and I'd like to know how they all compare to each other, but especially to Steam, as Steam kind of seems to be the platform of choice for the indie game.
Well, the thing, different platforms are different, right? So it's hard to compare them because they all have different audiences, they all have different technical requirements, but the thing that people like about Steam is the minimal friction involved in being on it, which is also true with iOS to a certain extent. So I don't know that those two platforms are very different in that regard, except that actually it's easier to get on iOS than Steam, which maybe makes it better to be on Steam.
Well, but let's be clear, the Steam market is way more predictable than the iOS market, just totally is. So,
yeah.
So you have the there's so many different axes in which to talk about it. Like, the ease of access, low friction thing is one part, but is it quote unquote a healthy, what I would consider a healthy market? I would not say that iOS is a healthy market where Steam is for a certain kind of game, which we can talk about in depth if you want. I tend to be somewhat of an outlier even among indies in that opinion, but I think iOS is a disaster.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. We're on this mailing list with a lot of indie developers who kind of have iOS Stockholm syndrome, because they'll rant at you all day about your game has to be this certain size and this and that, and it has to be a certain way because that's how iOS games are. And then you ask them how their game did, and they're like, well,
So
we made $11,000 or something, but we're going to try harder next time. It's really going to be good. And it's like, well, whereas a platform like Steam, at least, it can be a little harder to get on there, but once you're on there, if it's a certain scale of game, then it's pretty easy to make, $50,000, $75,000 just in a weekend sale or something. You can do that a couple times a year, and right there, that justifies the porting cost. So,
for me, the most interesting thing about platforms is not the friction or anything like that. It's we were talking about outside, which is that how direct of a correlation is there between quality and sales. right? Because as we're talking about out there, like I feel pretty strongly that quality is one of the few knobs you have direct control over as a developer, right? And it's actually, strangely enough, not the knob that most people focus on. Like there's a lot of like kind of pop faddish like focus on, oh, we've got to get like virality, we've got to get all these other things, but you have very little, we've got to get featured, we've got to get all these things that you kind of can consider like the weather, like you can't control it. And that's actually a Neil Young thing when he gave a lecture at EA, like this idea that like there's just some things in development that you can't control, like the weather. And one of his examples of the weather was Ben Gordon when you come visit your project. But the point is, you can't control those, so you need to be able to deal with them, but you don't put all your you don't make it so that your entire business plan and your entire livelihood and sustainability depends on the weather going well, right? It's like what I think is you have control over the quality knob, and in certain platforms I would claim Steam, on PC, it's not just Steam, it's PC, even PayPal. I mean, Minecraft's not on Steam, right? Like it's just, you can do it through PayPal. I mean, my data right now is not on Steam. It's that you have control over quality and the sales follow, and that's, PC, XBLA and PSN to some extent, XBLA more so than PSN. And it's a long, steep slope after that, right? Hopefully Nintendo won't totally screw up their next generation e-store thing, but I mean, they don't have a lot of track record there, so who knows. But those top three things of PC, with mostly Steam being 80% of that, but still PC, XBLA, and PSN, like for a certain size game, what I call a AAA indie game, a $15 AAA indie game, the higher quality game your game is, the higher the sales are. And that, you can't say that about almost any other market. You can't say that about AAA games, you can't say that about Facebook games, you can't say that about iOS games anywhere. And that's an amazing thing. It's like, that's why I consider it kind of the golden age of indie right now, because it's so rare to have an incredibly healthy market like that, where I define health as quality leads to sales. So it's great. So if you can make a game that is high quality, then you're totally set. It's great. I mean, a game like, there's so many examples of games you probably even never heard of if you don't follow, small downloadable games. But like, games that's, Magica is an example game that no one had really ever heard of, and came out and sold 200,000 copies in 2 weeks on Steam at, $15 a piece or $10 a piece. So like, boom, those guys can afford to make their next game.
I'm pretty sure it's over 1 million units.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
they have like 8 expansion packs.
Yeah, it's just a very high quality experience that they did. They made it for gamers, hardcore. It's all the things you're not supposed to do, right? Like there's no hardcore anymore. There's no all these quote unquote conventional wisdom of all these startups that all go out of business. It's like for me, the goal is not to get rich. The goal is sustainability. I want to keep making games, and to get sustainability, you want that linear correlation between quality and sales. It's the thing you can control.
Cool. And you mentioned Nintendo and what they're doing this generation and what they plan to do next generation. Tyrone kind of has a unique perspective, having ported several games to the Wii. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to the thing about Nintendo platforms is that they're kind of notoriously not very healthy for third parties. Nintendo games do well on Nintendo, and then everything else just kind of, unless it's Just Dance or whatever, kind of flounders. And so I was wondering, if you could kind of speak briefly to the experience that you've had with that.
Absolutely. The biggest issue I saw with Wii and WiiWare from Nintendo, and unfortunately with Nintendo we can't speak specific numbers, but I can tell you that when we did the demo program, which allows you to create a demo for Wii, which unlike XBLA, you're not required to make a demo, you're suggested to do so. The download for the demo is definitely there. There's a big gap between people buying and people downloading free stuff on the Wii. And the biggest problem I saw there is, as a consumer, is when I wanted to buy a game, just to find the game I wanted, before I would even be able to input the name of the game, it was 7 or 8 clicks. And by that point I'm bored, especially since the store it was a slow loading store. That was one of the biggest downfalls to the Wii shop. Another problem was that, to be fair, they moved away and never bothered to create a feature-driven system. It was essentially anything that was new would get featured and it would cycle through, but they wouldn't highlight the 10 to 30 great games. Even though you have over 200, probably 300 games on WiiWare, there's probably 24 games that are really good on that. But at the time, Nintendo didn't bother to make the effort to say, hey, these are the games you should be buying. Don't worry about these 150 puzzle games that developers have put out expecting to make money And that mentality from the developer side is what's really caused the Nintendo Store to fail, because you have a bunch of developers saying, oh, I made this game and it's Nintendo's fault because my game didn't sell. Well, partially yes, because Nintendo's original store was a failure, but it was also in great part because the developers were just trying to make a quick buck and make a quick game and didn't focus, again, going back to Chris's point, on quality. With the eShop, what we've seen is that the numbers are significantly larger. It's a sustainable market for a developer to continue to making games, to actually make a profit on. They've turned the system into a feature-driven system where it's not exactly perfect, but you're able to highlight not only the newest titles, but the ones that consumers should be buying. You're allowed to rate the games, and they've created a system where you have to play a game for an hour before you can rate it, so you don't get a lot of these one-star grievers from iOS, which is terrible. Oh, the game's not free, it gets one star.
So, what you mentioned how many clicks it takes to get to your game, and I've actually heard a lot about that from other developers on the PlayStation Network, where it's just your game is absolutely buried, and by the just a rough number that you get is kind of like the interest falls off 50% every time they have to click another. So by the time you get down to the ninth gate of hell, it's like 2 people.
For me, I don't understand why Xbox seems more intent on having car ads than selling games that actually make the money. Like, it just makes no sense.
Well, did you see their E3 conference? Like, the games are kind of like...
Yeah. It's such a sad thing, because we're like, I mean, most of us are in the industry, at least the indies are here, because like it's a new art form, right? It's like we're around where film was in 1905, and like back then, film was not the preeminent art form back then. Film was like, only poor people went to see films in 1905. It was all failed theater directors. But eventually, when they got a clue, it was a new art form, and film became the preeminent art form in the 20th century. And games have the potential to be that. And like the Xbox is right there at the beginning. They can totally help in that, and instead they're doing, they have almost no interest in it. They'd rather like chase whatever is popular now. Like Netflix and whatever. It's just so sad.
Well, the thing that struck me actually about what Tyrone was saying that I think is maybe most actionable by people here, because I don't know who's even thinking about Xbox in the audience and whatever, but that description of sort of the throng of basically useless puzzle games made by all these developers, right? That's something you see in a different form on every platform. On iOS, it's like 99-cent or free to play. Well, there's a bunch of different ones on iOS, but like just the little word game, or the trying to be Temple Run or trying to be Cannonball game or whatnot. The thing to keep in mind, you look at this sea of games, none of which are making any money and none of which anyone wants to play. And the thing to keep in mind, though, is that there's a reason for that pattern, right? It wasn't an accident. That happened because all these developers thought that was the right thing to do to make money, right? So when you come to a conference like this, there's always these waves of like what everyone thinks is the right thing, what the conventional wisdom is of the platform, and what you do if you're doing the right thing on that platform, right? And when you come to a place like this, you're hearing that right now. I mean, not in this panel, but over the course of the conference.
Let's ever accept this panel. We're telling
yes.
you the truth.
Yes. No, but the point is, that's where if something seems like a good idea, if something seems like the theme of the conference, or what is the conventional wisdom, it's pretty much not what you want to do. You want to go elsewhere than that, because if you do that, you're basically playing odds, that you're the one crappy word game out of the 30 ones or whatever that somebody actually pays attention to, and those are not very good odds. So really the thing to do is get an idea. It's like what Chris was saying about the weather. I mean, the wrong way to do it is say, here's a platform that's hot, I'm going to target that platform, I'm going to figure out what people on that platform play, I'm going to look at the demographics and understand what they will spend their money on. It's like most people who fail, that's what they do. So don't do that, I guess.
By the time you make your game, they've already moved on to something else.
Yeah, it's like, this actually gets to two other things. Like, so in another example of the weather is like Spy Party's been in development for 2.5 years and is going to be in development for 2 or more years after that. People are like, aren't you worried about the console transition? And it's like, that's the weather. Like, yes, there will probably be a console transition in the middle of that. If I make a high quality game, I have to trust that there will be a place to put it before or after the console transition. But another example is like people are always worried about clones. Like it's a huge deal in the indie community. Is that like there's just clones everywhere, and it's like the solution to that is in some sense make a game that's not that clonable because it's personal and interesting. You know, it's like if you made your game in 2 weeks and someone clones your game, why are you surprised? You know, it's like it didn't take that much effort. I'm not worried about people cloning Spy Party because like it's got years of development into it, and it's like, you know, I want more games in the space of psychological gameplay. That will, you know, that will make people more accepting. It's that old, like, I can't use Benjamin Franklin. There's one quote, I always mangle the quote, but it was like the quote being that don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If they're any good, you'll have to ram them down their throats. Like, just do interesting stuff, and it solves both problems. So.
You guys just answered like all of my questions in the span of 5 minutes.
Cool, so now we're going to lecture from here on out.
Well, the last part about the do interesting stuff, I mean, a question that I get all the time is like, how do you get the press to pay attention to your game?
Yeah,
Like,
they're
how do you get-
dying. They're dying to hear about your game.
Yeah, but they don't want to hear about a 99-cent iOS crossword game, right? That's the thing. They want to hear about something interesting that their audience is going to care about. And the way that you get press attention, the way you get word of mouth among players, you know, it's all this same kind of thing, is where you make something that's really striking to people, where they look at it and say, oh wow, that's the thing, right?
I mean,
And that's not what you get from the ambient environment at conferences like
yeah,
this.
there's not a how to get press. Like that is not like a good. You can't give a lecture about that. It's like you do. They are starving. Both players and press are starving for interesting things to write about. I mean, your average person at Kotaku who works at Kotaku has to post 8 times a day. And the reason they post the latest shotgun loadout in Call of Duty is because that showed up on their doorstep from a PR person who had assets and they were desperate for a post for 3 o'clock, right? And it's like, if you give them something interesting to talk about, they would love you. So people talk about like whether it's possible to overhype games and things. People, you know, Spy Party's got a lot of press for an indie game. And no, I don't think so. I worked on Spore, and that was a very hyped game, and I don't think we overhyped, I think we underdelivered. Like, the problem is, if you're going to like get press for your game, deliver on what you're saying you're going to deliver on. I don't think you can overhype a game. There's so many people in the world, and so few of them know about your game, even if you get a lot of press.
It's a puzzle.
That you can overhype, or
That you can overhype.
Yeah.
I think so many, or not so many, but there's a.
I mean, John, the witness is a
Yeah,
puzzle
I'm
game.
making a puzzle.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I don't.
Yeah,
I totally
the
disagree.
puzzle game you're making is on a different level than if you load up the WeWorker store, you'll see the type of games you're seeing on there.
But don't make those games is what we're saying, right? The takeaway is don't make those games.
It's not just don't make those games, it's be able to step away from your game and realize if you're good enough to warrant attention from press. Like you said, they're busy, they don't have a lot of time, they have a dozen games to play in a week. Is your game good enough? No, then find a way to make either a better game or just be able to accept that, okay, this game isn't good enough to waste X media's time because I spent a week making it, or 2 months making it, but unfortunately it's not to the level that it needs to be competitive.
So, Tommy, while we were talking, had time to draw like a crystal Ed 209 from Robocop. So I'm gonna aim this next question at him. We were talking about the clicks and how difficult it is on the Wii and the PlayStation Network to kind of like have discovery. And that's one of the kind of like pivotal scenes from Indie Game, the movie, where Microsoft didn't feature Super Meat Boy for the first several hours of the day that you guys went live. So I was wondering if you, and then the rest of you guys could chime in too, if you've seen anything coming up or a trend, maybe like Steam's new green light system or whatever, if there's anything that is kind of doing it right for indie games and discovery, and you know, once you have created that quality product, like Chris was saying, that it'll get the recognition without being buried by car ads or whatever.
Yeah, Steam seems to do just about everything right when it comes to distribution, when it comes to making people aware of your game. They run sales constantly, and then they advertise those sales. They have a really clever, like, just stupidly simple marketing thing where it has your picture of your game and then a little thing that says like 75 or 66% off or whatever, and people flock to that. And as a result, the more people that buy your game on sale are more people that are actually talking about it. So in that way, you see a sales boost after a sale. And then, you know, it trickles down and you go back up for the sale, and it's this wave that you constantly ride. Nico's been riding it for about 2 years now, and it's pretty consistent. And and that's to just with. I mean, we were talking earlier about how the barrier of entry for Steam is so low. I mean, it's very easy to get out there, and then as a result, it's easy for people to actually find your, find what they're looking for and actually find your game. And yeah, I mean, as far as they're the only ones I see that are actually doing stuff correctly. Everyone else, they're kind of dumb. All of their choices are so horrible. Like, I got a Vita, and I tried to. I bought a Vita for Metal Gear, not for any new game, but I tried to go on the store and just see, like, well, there's actually two stories here. The first story is I didn't know that I could just buy a Vita and then download, like, Metal Gear on it. I thought I had to go out and actually buy the cartridge for Metal Gear. So that's a failure on their part, because the game is the same price on PlayStation Network as it is when you go into the store, but the overhead of buying it in the store means less money in the developer's pockets, less money in Sony's pocket, all of this stuff. But if they would have made it more aware to everyone that, hey, you can just turn on your Vita, hook into the PlayStation Network, buy your game, yeah, sure, it'll take a couple hours to download, but you have it there, that's, to me, that's kind of a failure.
Well, I think they got burned by their download-only PSP, and they're overreacting to that.
That's true, but they got burnt because they did it wrong.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And they're doing it wrong again.
Yeah, they just consistently, it's like they try to, it's almost like they're starting to step into this new territory, but they're too afraid of that new territory to just take the plunge and just go, hey, it's digital. If you want the game, just download it. Because they're afraid all of their consumers are basically what they are, which is like 80-year-old men that don't understand new trends, and they're like, well, you have to have it in your hand for it actually to have any meaning, and that's not true. You can, that era is gone, and people don't seem to embrace that at all. Steam fully embraces it, and they do retail like as a side distribution to actually releasing Portal on whatever. And yeah, retail is still very, very relevant, but it's not always going to be, because it's, I don't know, for me at least, it's so much easier just to download stuff and not leave the house, because who wants to leave the house? There's nothing out there.
I don't know if you guys saw Will Wright's slide where it had a guy looking out the window playing the keyboard and said, reality, the worst game ever. So
It is.
kind of
The internet's like the sequel to the worst game ever.
You only get one life, reality.
It was fine.
But that's kind of like one life. Well, we almost got super meta. Following up on. So now we'll move into kind of like the talk of like what's coming up, and what you guys think about that. I know that a lot of you are very talented programmers who have like you're down in the trenches like making your own games instead of like dictating creative to someone else. And so it's like, do you look at the new technology and distribution models as individually as an exciting opportunity, or as kind of like a daunting hurdle that you're going to have to deal with? Like, I know Tommy spoke a little bit about how you don't use Unity or anything like that, is that correct? And
yeah.
You kind of make your own systems and do things your own way. So do you kind of look at new systems like as a, as just more crap that you're going to have to deal with to get your games out there? Like Chris said, Spike, his game's going to come out, and there'll be, if it's good enough, it'll go on a platform. But like Spike, yeah. Yeah. So, how do you guys look at what's coming next?
Well, actually, so you guys don't use any licensed engines either, right?
No, we don't.
So everybody at this table writes all their own code, which is interesting. And you may be able to infer some things from that. Let me just put it that way. It's not that big of a deal to target a new platform either, honestly.
Yes, I mean, if your goal is to fill the Blu-ray, whatever the new thing is, then I guess it's difficult because you have to hire a billion artists. But like, if your goal is to make an awesome game, like, make the game. Porting it is like a pain in the butt, but it's not like hard.
And if you have a solid engine and you're porting to various platforms, you have that engine for that target platform, and for each game you're doing in the future, you will have to make adjustments, and you'll have to handle it appropriately.
Like the AAA people freak out about the new generation because they're trying to compete on the things that are hard to do on that generation, which is I gotta shove more content up my game.
Or you have to use like the stupid touchscreen thing, or you have to wiggle the Wii back and forth, or, you know, this dumb crap that doesn't make necessarily a better game. Just, it's more gadgety stuff that they can market to like a select group of people that actually are like, hey, did you know you can tilt the screen and then the ball falls to the side? Like,
Right, exactly. In the core, all these systems are the same. It's a computer. Like input comes in, it
Yeah.
grinds in the input, and it renders a frame. Like that's what happens. It's the same on all of these platforms. It's just not that difficult.
Okay. It's fun too. I actually like it, but I'm strange like that.
Coding.
Yeah, I like getting new systems and then having to make stuff work on it. That's if I didn't do that, I don't know, be a bum or something.
I think both you and Edmund, right?
Probably.
So, another thing that Will Wright touched upon in his speech this morning was the Zynga approach to making games. After you're done stealing someone's idea, you throw up the basic version with like the Zynga has nice art. They throw it up on Facebook or wherever, and then from there they build upon it. You know, they put the ideas that the whole, you know, they started 25% user data and stuff like that. It's kind of like a giant beta test. Whereas the indie approach is to, you know, two to five guys working on one game for several years. Do you think, you know, and Zynga is a bad example because they have a negative connotation with them, just in general, but like there's other companies that do that too, to like slightly less evil approaches and stuff, and
That's how Minecraft was.
Yeah, it's
exactly. This is much better.
Spy Party's in closed beta right now, and we in open beta, and it's still got years to go. It's like, I mean, the Minecraft model, which Marcus calls the Cortex command model, is the idea of giving people early access, and like, you know, early access, pay for the thing, and they get all the updates, and you get income, you get money up front for giving them something of value. They want to play your game right now. It's, if your game is good enough and is a kind of replayability based game, like John said, I mean, The Witness wouldn't work that way because it's a spoilerable game, right? Like you can't play through a broken copy of a story puzzly game and then do anything later with it. But for a game like Spy Party or Minecraft or any kind of more sport-like game or more like, you know, procedural content-like game that has a lot of replayability, like it's a great model. And so I don't think it's limited to just Zynga. I mean, in this case, it's just, you want to, like, what's your goal? Is your goal to make an awesome thing, or is your goal to figure out how to monetize it better? I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things you can be doing during the beta, but like getting that feedback is awesome. And the income early is great too. It means you don't have to go to a publisher and have to bend over. Awesome.
So one of the other major trends, and this isn't really anything new, but it's definitely the way that a lot of things are kind of going this way now, is the free-to-play model, where, you know, a MMO, you know, comes out, and it's not even MMOs anymore, you know, it's like Battlefield or whatever, and it's free to play up to a certain point or to, you know, access the basics, but then if you want hacks, like you said, and other more, sometimes even more meaningful things that you kind of need to stay competitive or get the most out of the experience, you have to start paying. And on the iOS, it's usually far more than you would ever pay for, you know, like, a vault of gold in Infinity Blade is like $100, whereas like you could get the entire experience of Skyrim or anything else for $50 or $60. So how do you feel about that model, and like what works and what doesn't, in your opinion?
Well, I have some kind of an incendiary comment there, which is just that, I mean, free-to-play is kind of a slum. Like, I think there are good ways to do free-to-play games, but once you're in that territory, it becomes very hard to design a good game because free-to-play is all about weaving monetary incentives into the game design. And at that point, you're designing in order to manipulate the player to press the buy button rather than trying to give them a really good experience, right? This is why, like, all the Farmville games bug you every 30 seconds to like, you know, share with your friends or whatever. So for me personally, and this is not me telling anyone else what to do, but for me personally, I try very hard to stay away from that whole category of things because I think most of the games that you see in them are objectively terrible as actual games, with very few exceptions. There's actually a free-to-play game design that I might do sometime, but it doesn't involve, you know, buying hats or gold or anything. It would be like a, you know, it's broken up into a bunch of levels you can explore with friends, and it's like you pay $1 to buy access to this level. It's like buying little super miniature expansion packs all the time. I think that that's a respectful way to treat players. I think that, you know, tweet this to all your friends or whatever is not a respectful way to treat players.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't have anything against free-to-play in the abstract, but the reality is it warps game designs, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's what John, like, no, the majority of examples right now are negative. It's not inherently negative, it's just very risky. And that idea that it warps game designs, like there's this idea that like, I had this conversation with, it was actually with Chet from Valve. It was a little while ago, and it was 2:45, and it's this idea that like, there is a loss that if all games go to a service model, there's a loss, because there are certain game designs that simply do not work in that. And there's like, no, I don't understand why you just like, you know, make it more valuable to have your friends around and have a networked, you know, kind of thing. It's like, no, but there are games that just don't work that way. Like, you know, much like, you know, there are games that, you know, if touchscreens went away, there would be a category of games that would go away, right? Like, it's not saying that's all games or anything like that, but the idea of a single downloadable play once experience is that there are valuable games yet to be made in that, and it's a shame if if that goes away from the standpoint of it's a shame for creativity for the industry. But so by going in another so taking that further, like free to play warps game designs in that, like John says, it forces you to think about other things while you're designing the game that pay up front doesn't do.
Well, and it's not even just that. It's not that it forces you to think about these other things, but it fundamentally shifts your relationship with the player into something different. Right. And it's very easy for that to become very ugly.
Right, and so that it's like ignoring the like judgment about whether it's ugly or not. It simply changes things, which means that you're going to get different games than a pay up front model. And if people are like, oh, it's going to replace a night, it just seems silly. Like if it does replace, it's a loss for the art form basically, because there are things you can't do in one that you can do in the other.
But for the pay up front, there's companies abusing it. Like you look at Capcom, and they're charging you $60 for a game. You assume you have everything, and then they're calling stuff DLC when it's on disc, and you have to pay another $20 for 4 characters that are already there.
Yeah. Oh sure, no, there's people abusing. I mean, like money is great at making people abuse other people. Like there's no like, I mean, it's like that's going to happen, and you just hopefully, you know, capitalism, quote unquote, is supposed to self-adjust to that, right? You don't buy that game, and you know, whatever. Whether that, I mean, the invisible hand is not so beneficial.
There's a visible hand back there.
Yeah, there's a.
I agree with you guys about respecting the player, but what do you think of the numbers with regards to Zynga-style free-to-play games?
Do you mean, are they more profitable, or what do you mean?
No, does that strike you as naivete on the part of the players that are subjecting themselves to this lack of respect, or do you think that there's something redeeming in the mechanics that are just, you know, unavoidably addictive, even though they're quote-unquote disrespectful?
They're bored at work.
Recorded 33.
No, I mean, there's a ton of psychology data that shows that the human brain has certain things that it's weak to. You know, I mean, certain people have weaknesses to gambling or alcohol, or my daughter would eat cotton candy all day long if I didn't teach her that would actually harm her in the long run, right? And so, like, you know, if you want your body to be healthy, you feed it a wide variety of healthy foods and occasionally have some cotton candy, right? But until those kinds of mechanics are recognized for what they are, which is basically the idea, it's basically psychological cotton candy, which will eventually happen, I think. Like, people will abuse it, and it's a sad thing that companies are taking that time to make money, but that's kind of the way capitalism works.
On the flip side, from the designer perspective, I like to use the restaurant analogy, because you asked about numbers, right? Way more people in the world eat at McDonald's than eat at really nice restaurants, right? But I would much rather be a chef at a nice restaurant than flip burgers at McDonald's. If only because I feel like that's contributing to the premature deaths of a great many people. So, I don't know, you just got to decide what you want to do in the world and what you value, really.
Real fast, can I see a show of hands if anyone has questions? A couple? Okay, so then this will be my last question for you guys, and then we'll take some Q&A. This comes from Jeff Grubb, who is a GamesBeat writer, staff writer. If titles like Braid had sold 18 million copies, and first-person shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield, you know, and Just Dance and Guitar Hero and Rock Band, if they were all the niche titles, you know, they weren't like mainstream successes, how do you feel that would impact indie games and what you guys do in the games that you make, if at all?
True.
But is the question if, like, I'm trying to parse the question. I'm gonna restate the question, you tell me by channeling him, like, are you saying that if more arty, like, because this gets to like, is this a stealth way of defining indie games too? Like, are you saying games that are more arty and trying to be more meaningful as opposed to just more male power fantasy, if those games sold more and the male power fantasy, the adolescent male power fantasy stuff was more niche?
DDR is not male power.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the fuck's the
If you've
question?
seen some of the DDR players, they kind of is.
Yeah. So is the question, I mean, I think, so, I'm gonna turn this into a platform for me to rant for a second.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's a total shocking thing. So here's the deal. Like, games have the opportunity to be the preeminent art form of the 21st century if we don't screw it up, right? The way we're gonna screw it up is the same way comic books screwed up being a respected art form, by doing superheroes over and over and over and over and over again, right? This is totally obvious. Film and comics basically started at the same time. Film made it, comics didn't. Film was about people in normal situations. Comics were about superheroes, dudes and tights, right? We are currently about blowing up space marines or knifing orcs, so you can choose between those two incredibly diverse forms of content. Like, if Braid is about something
or
more,
you're a 99-cent iOS game that thematically is skinned about something casual, but actually is not about anything.
right, yeah, so you can either be, yeah, so like, the idea of Braid is about something, you may like Braid or not like Braid or whatever, but it was actually it was trying to kind of build some meaning in the player's mind, and by virtue of its gameplay and its art and its story and music and everything, it's like a whole aesthetic piece. If more games were more meaningful, then we'd be better off. So a game like Call of Duty is not really about anything. There's no aesthetic goal to Call of Duty. It's about, you know, having a great time blowing stuff up. And that's fine, but that's not, there are so many more emotions that interactivity could reach than just that. And so the very few games, even in the indie community, are trying to be actually about something, and that would be great if more games were like that. I have no idea if that answers the question.
On the commercial side, though, to answer your question, if Braid sold 18 million copies, yeah, you'd see EA, Capcom, Konami, everybody else trying to copy those games, and you'd see a ton of highly polished, really bad 2D platformers.
But that's
Instead of
missing what-
Space Marines, it would be guys in suits.
Guys,
Yeah, and that's what it would be.
Twist Emmy.
Yeah.
M. Night Shyamalan would make every EA game.
and he would be in every EA game.
Yeah. Okay, so Q&A. I'm left-handed, so we'll start from the left with Brian Fargo.
Yeah, the other day, Valve announced, or Steam, that they were going to do crowd-approved titles. I was just wondering what you guys thought of that new process they put in place.
I think they still have the process in place where you have to get your game approved, but the green light process seems kind of interesting because if there's a game where, even though Valve does almost everything right, they might miss an occasional title where they might possibly not get it. And if there's 100,000, 200,000 people that are telling Valve, hey, we'll buy this game if you put it on your store, they will do it. Because I can tell you from a perfect example, they didn't want Night Sky originally, which is one of the games that we developed. And people asked us on Twitter, why isn't this on Steam? I only buy my games on Steam. And I said, it's not up to us, we'd love to be on Steam. And they got behind us, the fans got behind us, and we actually got an email from Steam saying that they wanted the game on their service. So there's definitely some power there.
Yeah, I think the way to think about Greenlight is in the context of where it came from, right? So Valve wants to curate Steam and they want to release only things of a certain quality, which means they have to, you know, they have to sort of investigate games, right? But they only have a limited bandwidth to do that. And what was happening was there were a lot of indie developers just emailing them, right, saying, will you take my game on Steam? And as always happens, there were far more people emailing them than they could really pay attention to, and most of the submissions were really bad, right? So what this was them realizing that you know, if a lot of people out in the world want the game, then it's probably good. So we should probably look, it's just a way, it's an additional avenue of prioritizing things. It doesn't, you know, replace the old mechanisms. In fact, they have several ways that games come to their attention. It's just another way. And it's a way that they also, you know, from people who I've spoken to at Valve, they value reality checks, right? And if they think a game isn't good, but for some reason it gets a lot of attention on Greenlight, that's at least a reality check about their standards, which I think they would find valuable.
So you like it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it turns out in reality. I think that there are some, potential big questions about it, right? Like, I always go and encourage people to not do things in a focused, testy, appeal to the crowd kind of way, but to build the thing that people don't realize that they want yet, right? And Greenlight isn't really the right way to do that, right? Because it's more about, like, you probably bring your zombie game to Greenlight, right? You probably don't bring, like, this game I'm making, The Witness, which is like a subtle puzzle game where you actually have to be playing the final thing to really understand maybe why it's a good game.
This is the case with crowdfunding in general, right? Like, I mean, we
Yeah.
don't talk about Kickstarter or anything, but like, it works really well for some things, just like paid betas work really well for some things, and it's really got a lot of blind spots, just like everything else, you know?
Yeah, so you don't expect it to solve the whole problem, but it's one additional thing that hopefully is more good than bad. I'm cool with it.
It's funny, I don't think of Steam as really curated. They might have a minimum quality bar that they want to have, but curatorial, I don't think it is curated. Because their goal is to have as much stuff up there of a certain quality as possible, because they make 30% on everything that sells, right? So we want a lot of stuff up there, but at least they do have a little bit of a minimum quality bar.
Do you think it's gonna actually yield different games on Steam? Like, it just seems that the games that actually get on Steam are ones that are popular because they either get someone's attention or, you know, people have played it and really like it.
I
Like,
think the discovery is just, awareness building, if you want to not use the word marketing.
Yeah.
It's just part of game development as an indie. Like, you just have to be good at it, just like you have to be a good programmer. You don't have to be a good programmer or a good designer or a good marketer. You have to be pretty good at all of these and have a good strength and great at one of them, maybe is a way to put it. But and the better you are at all of them, the better your game is going to do. It's just part of making the game nowadays. And so you have to be able to, like, know, like we were talking about with the press earlier, like you have to be able to, A, make an interesting game, and B, talk about it in a way that communicates that interestingness to people.
But the nice thing about Greenlight that's different, I think, is that it provides a more open way of demonstrating that you have interested people to Steam, right? Like before, they would like look at IGF winners or something, but then everyone complains, oh, the IGF is like a, you know, inbred, like whatever.
Right, there's data that shows that crowdsourced ranking systems are totally popularity contests. So
Yeah.
There's flaws in everything, right?
No,
Like,
but this has an interesting structure where if you have a lot of Twitter followers or you have a forum that maybe is niche because like Ragnar Wargamers go there, but the general public doesn't have awareness of that, you can actually channel that now. And so we'll see how that goes.
So yes, we like it.
Who was next?
My boss. What's your favorite platform and what do you want still to happen in that platform?
The question was, what is your favorite platform right now?
the platform, like the CPU with some memory and a graphics card attached to it. That's a screen, usually an input device. Is my
Do you
favorite
mean
platform.
defined as a machine or defined as a distribution service?
Whatever range comes to mind. What is the favorite platform that you want to be published on? How could that platform be improved?
I don't know. I mean, my favorite platform is human consciousness, right? Because when I design games, they tend to be about subtle things that happen in people's head. And the program and the graphics are like implementation details on how to get there. And so platform is like second order or third order implementation detail. Like whatever platform we need to do to make the game happen, we will. That said, there are some not favorite platforms. Like I don't like what XBLA and PSN are doing lately. With regard to very heavy certification, and they seem to be doing a worse job at it now than they used to even, which was always terrible. So I stay away from those, but...
That's always kind of surprising me that I hear such horror stories about Castle Crashers and a million other games that are just stuck in certification hell, and then they come out and they still have like save game-eating glitches.
Yeah, so the thing to understand is that certification on both those consoles, there's a long list of rules that you have to follow, right? That it doesn't look that bad until you sit down and really try to do it in the context of their actual APIs that are not designed to follow those rules at all, right? But then what happens is when the game goes into testing, they're testing against those rules. They're not actually testing your game for actual bugs. So you have to do that. And, they claim to be doing that, but they don't really. So that's, like with this Fez problem that just happened, for example, they probably just didn't even test that use case at all. Because they would rather play through your whole game again and make sure that the menu says leaderboards on it and make sure that, like, you don't render graphics to the outer 10% of the screen. Like, stupid stuff like that. So, yeah, so those are my unfavorite platforms.
The thing I want for the future of platforms is what's happening sort of right now, which is that quality correlation with sales. Like, if that's there, then we're good. If it gets to the point where everything is appealing to 3 dudes in a room in Cupertino, or everything is like, you've got to get virality and spam everybody, or everything, if there's not a lot of discoverability or ways of doing grassroots, slow burn, awareness building, then there's problems for what I would claim is what we need to push games forward as an art form. But if you've got a thing where if you can do a high quality game and it will sell enough to make another high quality game, then we're good. Like, the rest of it's kind of noise.
Tommy, you had you had a joke app up on the kind of like an experiment up on the iTunes store, and you kind of did a rant, I believe it was at GDC, about just the kind of like the flaws of the App Store, and it kind of went down immediately after that. Like it brought it to Apple's attention, and now you're working on kind of like a specialized edition of Super Meat Boy using the touch screen and everything.
Right.
Are you worried at all that Apple kind of holds grudges?
No, they don't. They've actually already contacted us and want it, so it's not a grudge thing at all. That was me speaking out against that, because when the App Store sort of started, there was nothing good. It was all manipulative crap. I mean, it was just like, hey, let's put Street Fighter on this because Street Fighter is a cool brand, and lots of people will buy it. And that's why I compared it to Tiger handhelds, is because you weren't actually buying Street Fighter, you were buying, you were buying like a sticker of Street Fighter to just place on your iPhone and tell your friends, hey, have you played Street Fighter on iPhone? Yeah. And then there's no other conversation after that because nobody cares because it's not good. But so, yeah, that was me kind of speaking out, and that was like in the early times of the App Store when everybody was just sort of figuring out like what to do with it. And nowadays, and like what we're doing with Meat Boy is we want to have a portable version of Meat Boy, and in that way we're designing it for that platform. So it's not like we've just ported Meat Boy over to it and we're trying to get sales on it. It's actually like a personal challenge to us to see if we can make a good game that feels like Meat Boy on this platform, not push Meat Boy onto this platform so we can get 1 million sales or anything like that. That's not what we were doing, and that's what I was ranting about, was just this horrible practice of, let's throw Mega Man on there, let's throw Sonic. Well, have you beaten it? No, because I can't get past the first stage because it's all touchscreen controls and they're awful. That's what I was ranting about, and yeah, Apple doesn't seem to hold any grudges. I mean, I think they know, and I also think they don't care, because for them, it's just kind of a money thing. They get 30% of however many billions of dollars that App Store's made already. So if they think a game is, if any game, and this is why their barrier of entry is non-existent, any game that comes out on it, any amount of money that it makes, they're going to get 30% of it. So they're not going to be like, ooh, no. Well, the only time they'll do that is if you make fun of Apple in the game. Like, that's the only time, because like Pokemon came out. Remember Pokemon Yellow? It would just crash on launch, and it got through approval because they don't care. It's not something they actively care about. They just...
Or people complain like
Yeah.
Snuggle Truck, which became Snuggle Truck.
What was that one?
Snuggle Truck, the one where you're taking immigrants across the border. And then it turned into you're taking fluffy stuffed animals across a landscape.
It's the same.
It's the same. It's like putting an asterisk on a curse word. It's the same thing. I like that.
I don't know how much time we have left, but were there any final questions? Yes, sir?
You said something that there doesn't need to be a class to teach people getting press. I have to disagree only because I think as far as indie developers, that might be one of the most important things. You take a game like the Bit Trip series or 4 AM, and these are games that should have gotten way more exposure than they did, but they were only seen by a minor portion of the gaming world. And I feel this weird thing about gaming journalism because it's so saturated that everybody sees games all the time. You have so many platforms. You have iOS, you have XBLA, you have PlayStation Network, you have all these things, and then you have indie games. These are games that should be seen by people who used to play games when they were children, who don't play games now, who are in the art world. I feel like something like Bit Trip should have been seen by the electronic music world, by the art world, and these are things that are not shown. How would you guys get your product across beyond gaming? Because I feel that the indie world needs to be seen by more than the gaming space. That's not a space that they already know about.
Let me say something that's going to make me a little bit unpopular in certain respects. Because I know the people who make both of those games. And I actually haven't played 4 AM, but I've played a bunch of the Bit Trip games. And especially if you're speaking about the original Bit Trip, it's a small game. It's a simple mini game. Like, it's cool. Like it's cool as a take on Pong that's like synchronized to music. Bit Trip is not going to change anyone's life. Like, it's just not. So when you say, and I'm only using this as a starting point, right? It's not a criticism of any of those games. But when you come to me with this statement, these indie games should be seen by the broader world, I don't think that that is true in the vast majority of cases. Most of these games are not good enough to survive. Like if you got 8 million people out in the public and pointed them at this game and said, hey, look at this game, come play it, and they play it for like 5 minutes and go like, okay, that's okay, whatever, they wouldn't be enthralled by it, right? That's the thing that people don't get about press, is you don't want to try to get exposure of something to people if they're not going to appreciate the thing anyway when they hear about it, right? So the question is, to me, how do you make something that people are actually deeply going to care about, right? Not how do you make something that
That's
you
what,
can sell to them for $5.
that's what I was trying to say
barely.
about the press class or lecture or whatever. It's like, yes, of course there's techniques and things to learn about how to speak to the press, how to speak to fans, how to build awareness, all of these things. But the very first sentence in that lecture is make something awesome. And that's so much more important than all the things you're going to talk about in that lecture that it's almost like that it's almost valid to say, just don't focus on that. Make something awesome, and the rest of it will come. You just start talking to people. Like, you're going to get pointers from friends to do that stuff, but it's so unimportant compared to doing the awesome thing in the first place, which is so much harder. That, from a relative standpoint, it's a hugely important part. Awareness building is hugely important, but making the amazing thing that's interesting that people want to hear about, it actually kind of will do it itself in some ways. You have to help it along. You kind of push. But
Well, as a data point, right? So Braid is a game that got a lot of press back in the time, especially in an environment where nobody took indie games seriously. Like a hit indie game in 2007 was like Gish, which had sold 5,000 copies or something, right?
Yeah.
The marketing budget for Braid was $0.00, right? I just like emailed some people and said like, hey, let me show you this game, and then I wrote a little paragraph about it. And I didn't really know how to speak to the press. It was the fact that enough people who I sent the game to found it interesting. That did the work. I didn't really have to do that much work, right? And that's the thing that a lot of people are missing now, is they don't have a game that does the work for them. So they feel like they have to work really hard, but then you're just pissing off the people in the press or whatever, wasting their time. Like, you know, you make some game that's just like 100 other games. And, you know, Bit Trip isn't like this. It's a little bit of its own thing. But what most indies do is they make something that's just like everything else on iOS, and then they try to carpet bomb the press with like, please play my game. And the press ignores them, as they should, because it's not interesting to anybody. So
it's not that it won't do it itself. It won't do all the work for you, but man,
it'll do 90%.
It'll do 90%. Like, yeah.
In the case of Bit Trip, that's actually a pretty unique example because it's published by a very tiny publisher, Axis, which has a almost non-existent marketing budget, which then makes it difficult to promote the game. If the publisher has 15 other games that they translated from Japan that they're publishing on PSP, and they have this small WiiWare game, they're not going to put a lot of effort into promoting it, regardless of how good it is. So that's a case where the developer probably could have done a better job promoting the game because they have passion behind it, they understand the game, they really want to show it to media, and media love talking to developers about games. They don't want to talk to the publisher most of the time because they get stuck with a 30-minute demo where they don't get to play the game.
Alright. Okay, so our time is more than up. So thank you everyone for coming out to the indie panel, and I hope it was informative. Thank you guys.
Thanks.